Hello and welcome to ThePrint. The unsealing of a US indictment alleging that an Indian government official was involved in a plot to assassinate a Sikh extremist has clearly made waves. This, of course, comes amid a diplomatic spat between India and Canada over the killing of a Sikh extremist, Hardeep Singh Nijjar, back in June in British Columbia. Now, to unpack sort of the geopolitical and security consequences or ramifications of these developments, I have with us a great panel today. We have Rajesh Rajagopalan, the professor of international politics at JNU. We have Mr. Manoj Joshi, distinguished fellow at ORF, who specializes in security affairs. And all the way from the US, we have Mr. Paul Kapur, who is a professor of national security affairs at US Naval Postgraduate School. And he's also a visiting fellow at Stanford's Hoover Institution. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, I think my first question I'll address to Mr. Rajagopalan. Professor, some people are saying that, rather experts are saying that the Americans have an agenda by unsealing this indictment. Some are calling it a pressure tactic. Do you share that view?
No, I don't think that's the case. I think this was something that was not entirely under the control of the White House as such, because once something like this happens and the DOJ or especially the DOJ gets involved, this is, the DOJ is not fully answerable to the White House as such. So this takes on an independent, it becomes an independent prosecution. And so I don't think it is entirely true to suggest that this was somehow being planned by the US administration or the deep state or anything of that kind. In any case, that makes very little sense. That kind of an argument makes very little sense because obviously the United States is interested in deepening its security relations, security partnership with India. So the suggestion that they would be looking to pressure India on something like this really doesn't cut much ice. I don't think that is the case.
And from what we know, this was raised by, William Burns, Blinken, several senior US officials over the course of the last 6 months. But I think I wanted to also ask both Mr. Kapur and Mr. Joshi. India has set up an inquiry committee to look into this matter. Certain senior US officials, Blinken and John Kirby, have appreciated the setting up of this committee. Do you think this indictment will spur the Canadians to provide evidence that they have been talking about for very long now with regard to the killing of Sikh extremist Nijjar? Do you think we can expect anything from the Canadians now that this has come out?
Should I answer, or you want Paul to answer this?
Please go ahead.
Well, as far as the Canadians are concerned, they have a different kind of a legal process. My own feeling, and this is by reading the indictment in the US court, there is a clear linkage between what was happening in what happened in Canada and what is happening in the United States. And your own publication has reported that the RNAW officer in San Francisco has been expelled. As far as evidence is concerned, you read the US indictment, very interesting. Right at the bottom, there is a sentence which says, all these are allegations. Everyone is innocent until proved guilty, meaning something to that effect. So whatever the United States has said as yet it will prove it, or it will aim to prove it in their court. That's the process that has begun. As far as India setting up this committee is concerned, I think it's a bit of a farce. The MEA.
Why do you say that?
I say that because the MEA is not really involved in all this. Meaning, this is the allegation is against an intelligence agency. The MEA is hardly going to get answers. It doesn't have judicial powers in any case. So what kind of, I think the MEA thing is just a, what should I say, a nervous reaction on the part of India because they knew this indictment was coming, because if you look at the timing, that's how it works. But all I'm trying to say is that the MEA track is a complete, somewhat, as I said, I use the strong word farcical. I think it's farcical. Nothing's going to happen with them.
Paul, would you like to jump in on that? Do you think it's farcical?
I don't know if it's farcical. I mean, I think I take Manoj's point that the MEA won't have jurisdiction to look into this, perhaps. I think it is a way of expressing that India takes seriously what the United States has said and the contents of the indictment. The Indian reaction has actually been quite different in the U.S. case than it was in the Canadian case. So in the Canadian case, the reaction was sort of, to deny the allegations and quite vociferously to demand evidence. And then there was this tit for tat kicking out of diplomats in each other's countries. The Indian response here has been quite a bit more restrained and with the official statement saying, well, this would be contrary to policy, and we'll look into this, and we'll set up some sort of an inquiry. So even whether that ever comes up with anything substantive or not, it is a signal that India takes this seriously and understands that there's some concern here on the U.S. part.
If I can just bring it back to Professor Rajagopalan, sort of a broad question. How do you think this controversy or this indictment will affect India-US bilateral ties on a broader scale? Do you think it will not have that much of an impact? Do you think this is something completely different that will not sort of affect the warming of ties that we've seen, with PM Modi's visit to the US in June and the slew of defense deals signed between the two countries? How do you see this affecting the larger bilateral relationship?
I think it is quite possible that we might come out of this without too much damage. But it is the point is that this is going to take attention, divert attention from other areas that we need to cooperate on, and I think that's probably damaging in its own way. That is, overall, there might not be, ultimately, maybe 2 years down the line, 5 years down the line, this might not have a huge impact. But right now, for the next several months, while this court case proceeds and so on, this is something that diplomats on both sides will have to deal with. And so this is just an unnecessary hiccup in the relation. So while it might not have that final sort of ultimate any effect, the question is, did we really need this unnecessary diversion of attention on something that now both sides have to sort of sort out? So that I see that as a more serious effect rather than ultimately what happens with the bilateral relations. But of course, what happens with the bilateral relations also depends on how India handles these accusations. If I agree with both Paul and Manoj that India appears to be taking this more seriously than in the Canadian case, and so that might indicate that India will try to do what it can to put the issue behind it. But but it also depends on how that is done. I mean, what is the how does India satisfy the US in terms of what these accusations are, what sort of agreement the two sides come to in terms of how to resolve this and so on. So I think it's not as if that this thing can be will not have any effect. But if India is able to handle it reasonably well, then it should not have any ultimate effect other than the unnecessary diversion of attention from more pressing issues that the two countries have to deal with.
And by pressing issues, I think the subtext there was China, if I may imply that.
Absolutely.
Right.
I mean, we do have much more important issues in terms of the Indo-Pacific and the cooperation that we have with regard to China. And, especially when it comes to intelligence, I mean, one of the areas of cooperation that India and the US has, and probably the most effective area of cooperation that we have with each other is on intelligence. I mean, India did receive significant intelligence with regard to Chinese actions at the border, both during the Doklam crisis and at the Galwan, during the Galwan crisis, and subsequently even last year in Arunachal. So there is, this is especially with intelligence officials being expelled and so on and so forth. This is going to potentially have an effect on that cooperation, and that would be a shame. I mean, I think that is, so those kinds of things are what I think is most damaging and could potentially have some effect.
Mr. Joshi, anything you'd like to add on that?
Well, I think I broadly agree with Rajesh that there will be a chill, and the chill will be in the intelligence side. So what the administration could do has already been done in a certain sense, and again, Rajesh brought out this fact that there is a separate legal process which the administration doesn't have much control of. Meaning, Gupta ji is probably singing to the FBI. The FBI will, if the past is the pattern, he will be offered a deal saying that, we'll cut your sentence to 10 years if you cooperate, and he will give more information. And what I find striking is the incompetence of the Indian intelligence setup, meaning the fieldcraft seems to be the fieldcraft seems to be hopeless. Meaning here, the indictment talks of the US having information on telephone conversations, on emails, etc. Now you don't do that kind of stuff. Meaning when you're planning assassinations, this you never put it down. I don't know. Meaning, I think you should have much more respect for US counterintelligence capabilities. They are formidable. They can crack virtually any code that you can think of and crack any kind of a machine or a phone or whatever it is. And they take their job seriously. India, unfortunately, the country where counterintelligence is fairly hopeless already, meaning it's already has a bad record in counterintelligence. And I don't think they quite understand out here. So there is an element of recklessness in this behavior. I think the US is very serious about allies and friends getting into negative activities in the United States. I've forgotten the name. There was that Jewish person, senior officer who was arrested. He was in jail for 20. Polak, yes.
Polak.
So the Polak was in jail for 20 plus years. Every Israeli prime minister or president would go and beg the US to release him. But the US said no, because they wanted to make an example of him. That you don't, as friends and allies, many US may spy on friends and allies, but the friends and allies better not spy on the US. Meaning, let me put it that way. You see? The US has the leeway.
Right. Paul, I just wanted to bring you in to sort of understand, do you agree with the sort of opinion that Indian intelligence officers, their fieldcraft with regard to this whole controversy was, could have been better?
It would seem that way. I mean, I don't know all the details, obviously, of the case, and a lot of it remains hidden from view still. But from what we know, just at a very basic level, Mr. Gupta, who was, I guess, the middleman between the Indian government official and a hitman that they were trying to hire. The hitman that he was trying to hire actually turned out to be a DEA agent.
Double agent.
Which is how he got caught. So yeah, it doesn't seem like sort of crack methodology to hire a U.S. government official to carry out this killing, which is then how he got caught. So yeah, on the surface of it, at least from what we know, it doesn't look great in that sense. But I would agree with both of my colleagues that this is something that will create some headwinds for a while, both because I think it's irritated the United States and senior officials as well. If you look at the senior officials who interacted with their Indian counterparts specifically on this issue, senior intelligence officials, national security advisor, Secretary of State, and the president, and apparently, and Prime Minister Modi at the G20. So, that gives you a sense of how seriously it's being taken. I think there's a recognition that countries do these kinds of things in extremists sometimes. The United States certainly has. During the War on Terror, there were certainly targeted killings, the most famous of which was Osama bin Laden, but there were others, recently Soleimani in Iran and so on. But you don't do it on the soil of close partners. And if the allegations are true, that's what was attempted in this case. So that will create some headwinds, and it will also give some ammunition to skeptics of the U.S.-India relationship in the U.S. And there is a cohort of them who are critical of India on human rights issues or what's called democratic backsliding issues, especially under the Modi government. So that also makes it harder to push the relationship forward. So there, it'll create some headwinds, but. Again, as my colleague said, the strategic interests that we share, that India and the United States share, particularly with regard to the need to offset rising Chinese power and ensure that the Indo-Pacific remains free and open, that is just an overriding interest. And so these other sorts of things are unfortunate and will perhaps slow things down, but they're not going to derail the relationship ultimately.
In fact, when I was reading the indictment, and reading about the double agent, the DA agent, it reminded me of how in the early 2000s, Raw was hit hard when a senior officer, Ravinder Singh, was believed to have been honey-trapped by the CIA or sort of defected to it. And that really hit the image of the RANW. And Mr. Joshi, you talked about that. You touched upon how this has affected sort of the image of Raw in this recent controversy. But I guess I want to pivot a little bit to talk about the role of media when it comes to, one, the killing of Nijjar, and two, the assassination attempt on Pannu. It seems that a lot of the information that came out from the US side and the Canadian side was after leaks from the media, right? The Global Mail was holding a story before Trudeau went on the floor of the parliament and made allegations against India. We saw an FT story come out before the MEA here in India finally ended up saying that, yes, we did speak to the Americans and we did set up an inquiry meeting on 18 November. And this was told to the Indian public on 29th November. 10 days after the setting up of that committee. And a lot of questions have come up as to, if these leaks didn't come out, would the Indian public, the Canadian public, the American public, would they have been kept in the dark if not for these leaks? I'm just curious to know what you gentlemen see with regard to this, or how you view the role of media in these two controversies.
Well, I can say something. I'm a media person. And you can be sure that such sensitive stuff was leaked by the government. Meaning it's the government of the day, meaning whether it was the Canadian government to the Global Mail, whether it is the US government to the Financial Times, this is signaling, meaning they show the kind of advance warning that this is going to happen. And if you're a good, smart journalist, you know the right persons and you get the right kind of information. It's a scoop. And FT has to be congratulated for the scoop. So what I'm trying to say is that the media in this it's not as though the media dug this out somewhere. this was given to the media on a platter for a purpose. And as you can see from the what has been happening, that the US has been trying over the last, I think, 3-4 months to get the government of India to take this issue seriously. Now, the government, the only statement the government's given is saying that this is not our policy. Now, my point is, if this is not your policy, what is your policy? Can you please spell out your policy? I mean, we have heard this inane kind of a thing that this is not our policy. I don't know whether it's your policy or not, but what I'm trying to say is, what is your policy? Please spell it out. See,
Was that made
media
the Indian government to distance itself from CC1, who's been named in this indictment? Is it clearly an attempt to distance itself from this?
No, I don't think that's possible, because I think the government of India also knows that the government of United States knows exactly who this person is. And also, if you notice in the indictment, says that this guy has been in continuous service with the government of India, meaning he continues to work with the government of India. So I don't think the government will distance itself from this particular person. That would create a lot of demoralization within the setup, within the intelligence setup in this country. So that I don't think that is the aim. But all I'm trying to say is that the government, this is a very sensitive matter, obviously. My own view is that the government has not done enough to assuage the feelings in the top echelons of the United States. So all these guys, Burns and Blinken and all these people have been coming, talking to the government. Certainly, the government of India could have possibly been more diplomatic, more, what should I say, proactive in dealing with the situation, in dealing with the United States, and keeping a lid on it. But to keep a lid on it would have required them to do something substantive quietly. And obviously, they didn't do something substantive quietly, so hence the leaks.
Professor Rajagopalan, what do you think about the role of media and these leaks?
Well, I'm only tangentially related to the media, so I will I'm but in terms of government policy, obviously governments occasionally use media leaks for their purposes to put pressure and so on and so forth. But that might have been, there is some indication to the effect that in the Canadian case, at least, that the Canadian newspaper found out about this, and that the Prime Minister's statement the Canadian Prime Minister's statement in Parliament was a hurried thing that they put together because they knew that the story couldn't be kept under wraps for too long. So I heard some reports to that effect. I'm not sure about the veracity of it, but it is also possible that in the Canadian case that they were using that media leak both to put pressure on India, but also for domestic political purposes. In the US case, it's slightly different, because obviously the indictment was coming down and there was nothing that could be done. I don't think that there was very much that the administration could do about the indictment. And so the leak may have been a way of sort of setting the ground or preparing the ground, because it happened only a day or so before the indictment came down, I think. So that is a different. I think the situation is slightly different in this case. Not that Americans are above using leaks the American government is above using leaks. Obviously, they have done that even in the case of India. The most famous case being, of course, the Clinton administration leaking Vajpayee's letter, Prime Minister Vajpayee's letter to the New York Times. So that those things happen, but and they use it. But I think these two cases are slightly different in that I think the US case, because it was DOJ indictment coming down, I don't think they really had very much choice in the matter. So that happens with, of course, all governments, including in the US and Canada, but of course in India too.
Paul, anything to add? Any last thoughts?
Yeah, I think leaks have played a role here for sure, but I agree with Rajesh that in the U.S. case, this is a court case. It's going to be a public case. It's a murder for hire case. So and there's an indictment, and that they weren't going to keep it secret or try Mr. Gupta in a secret court or anything like that. So there was really no way of getting around this information coming out, and to the extent that maybe they tried to get ahead of it a little bit to prepare the groundwork, but there wasn't a lot of time there. And in the end, this is public information because it's a straight up crime, and it's going to be prosecuted that way in the United States.
Before we wrap up, I do want to bring it back to how this whole all these developments have reflected on the image of the Indian intelligence agency. And I know Mr. Joshi touched upon that. But Paul, from the American perspective, you could offer one. How is the RANW being viewed right now? Fieldcraft we've talked about. But going forward, how do you see things panning out?
Well, I don't know if there's a consensus view on this, in relevant circles, but I think certainly, as I was saying, there is an element of this which seems not to be sort of top flight fieldcraft or tradecraft or whatever it might be. If you end up hiring to do your dirty work somebody who's actually an official of the government of the country in which you're trying to do this, and so you end up getting caught and the whole thing unravels. So there's that element to it. I think the bigger question is just the impact that it has on how the United States and senior officials view India in terms as a reliable partner, also in terms of there's a certain level of audacity for being willing to do something like this on the soil of a close partner. Again, states do these kinds of things in extreme situations sometimes, but generally not with their close friends. And so one of the macro tasks that we have between India and the United States is to figure out how our relationship is going to work, what it means, what can we expect of each other. And so, we hit bumps in the road as we try to figure out rules for the road. And this is one area where I think maybe some of the rules of the road weren't entirely clear. My sense is that the United States will try to make very clear now that one rule of the road that can't be violated is you can't carry out operations like this on each other's soil. And my sense is that there'll be some kind of an understanding behind the scenes on it, because the incentives to get this right and to make sure that the relationship moves forward are very, very strong.
Well, on that note, thank you so much, gentlemen, for taking the time out of your busy schedules to discuss this very important topic. I'm sure you all will be monitoring it as closely as I will in the coming weeks and months. Thank you so much.